0347 local time. The Strait of Hormuz, 18 nautical miles south of Bandar Abbas. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, hull lights cold, steams north-northeast at 12 knots, threading the inbound traffic separation lane on a routine freedom of navigation transit. Her SBY 1D radar paints a clean picture. Then, in the span of 90 seconds, that picture changes. 25 surface contacts bloom out of the coastal clutter near Keshem Island, low signature, high speed, fanning into a dispersed crescent. The bridge crew already knows what the radar is telling them. Small boats, lots of them, closing fast. What was reported in the open press the next morning was a brief, almost theatrical confrontation. A swarm of Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy speedboats harassed a U.S. destroyer. Warning flares were fired. The boats turned away. A few headlines, a few statements, a few stock photos of speedboats kicking up wake. Within 48 hours, the story was buried. But that version of events is not the story. That is the surface of the water. The real engagement happened below it, around it, and well above it. And what Tehran chose to bury was not a defeat in the conventional sense. It was something more uncomfortable. It was a rehearsal that failed. The visible interpretation was simple. Iran, under pressure from sanctions and regional setbacks, was sending a message. 25 hulls, mostly Paycap and Tundar-class fast attack craft, a handful of modified Bagamars, possibly 2 larger Hodon missile boats holding back an overwatch. A classic asymmetric demonstration. The American destroyer, outnumbered 25-1, was supposed to look isolated, exposed, symbolically vulnerable in the world's most important oil choke point. That is the story Tehran wanted told, in defeat as much as in victory, because the alternative narrative, the one the radar tapes actually wrote, was far more damaging. The central question is this. If a single destroyer can absorb a coordinated swarm of 25 fast attack craft inside Iran's own home waters, what does that say about the doctrine Iran has spent 30 years building? Start with the visible architecture. The destroyer in question, a Flight IA Arleigh Burke, displaces just under 9,400 tons. She carries 96 vertical launch cells, a 5-inch Mark 45 gun forward, 2 25mm Bushmaster chain guns for 50 caliber mounts, and a phalanx close-in weapon system aft capable of putting 4,500 rounds per minute into anything inside a mile and a half. Her SBY 1D radar tracks hundreds of contacts simultaneously out past 200 nautical miles. Her Combat Information Center runs Aegis Baseline 9, fused with cooperative engagement data from any allied platform inside the link. Against her, the Iranian formation, Paycap-class boats displace under 20 tons, run at 52 knots, and carry either 2 324mm torpedoes or a pair of Kawsar anti-ship missiles with an effective range of about 20 kilometers. Tandars carry C-802 derivatives reaching out to roughly 120 kilometers, in theory. The Bagamars carry rockets and heavy machine guns. Cheap, fast, numerous. The entire swarm, hull for hull, costs less than a single SM, 2 salvo from the destroyer's magazine. That is the cost asymmetry Tehran has built its naval doctrine around. The math, on paper, looks compelling. A $2 billion warship cannot afford to trade missile for missile against $20 million worth of fiberglass and outboard engines. Saturate the defenses, force the destroyer to expend her interceptors, then close inside the minimum engagement envelope where her missiles cannot depress and her gun cannot traverse fast enough. Inside 2,000 yards, in theory, the swarm wins. That is the doctrine. That is what was being tested at 0347 that morning. And that is where the structure begins to break. Because the cost exchange argument only holds if the destroyer is alone. It only holds if her magazine is a deciding variable. It only holds if the swarm achieves surprise, achieves geometry, and achieves saturation simultaneously. Strip any one of those 3 legs away, and the entire asymmetric calculus collapses. On that night, all 3 legs were already gone before the first Paycap cleared Keshem. Consider the geometry. The destroyer was not transiting blindly. She was a visible node in a layered surveillance picture that had been built over the preceding 72 hours. AP 8 Poseidon out of Al-Udeid. It had been quietly working the northern Gulf for 2 days. Its APS 154 radar mapping every IRGC boat pen along the coast. An MQ-4C Triton, orbiting at 50,000 feet over international waters, had a persistent track on every hull movement out of Bandar Abbas, Bandar Lenja, and Abu Musa. A Virginia-class submarine, whose presence will never be officially confirmed and whose absence will never be officially denied, was operating somewhere inside the Strait's deep water channel. And 40 nautical miles to the south, an expeditionary strike group with 2 Burke-class escorts and an embarked Marine detachment was holding station. Deliberately just over the horizon, the destroyer was not outnumbered. She was bait, calibrated, deliberate, and entirely aware of it. This is the hidden variable Tehran's planners did not account for. Not the destroyer's own weapons. The architecture behind her. The officer in the Combat Information Center that night, a tactical action officer with 2 prior Gulf deployments, watched the swarm separate into 3 waves on his display. Wave 1, 8 boats fanning wide to flank. Wave 2, 12 boats charging the centerline. Wave 3, 5 boats, including the 2 Haodongs, holding back at 15 kilometers in overwatch, presumably to launch the 802s once the close fight committed the destroyer's defenses. Textbook swarm geometry. The same geometry the IRGC Navy had drilled in exercises since the late 1990s. He had seen the playbook before. So had the air wing commander aboard the carrier operating in the North Arabian Sea, whose F divided by a -18s were already turning inbound at altitude. Call sign silent. Transponders cold. So had the EA-18G Growler crew that had been airborne for 90 minutes, dragging a wide arc north of the Strait. Its ALQ-99 pods warm and listening. What Tehran did not know and what the bridge crew of the destroyer did was that the Iranian command and control net had been mapped, characterized, and partially compromised days earlier. Every frequency the swarm coordinator used to vector his boats was being read in real time. Every burst transmission from the Overwatch Haodongs was being geolocated within seconds. The Growler was not jamming yet. It was learning. That was the visible layer. The real pressure sat underneath. When the lead pay cap crossed the 8-kilometer threshold, the destroyer did not fire missile. She did not need to. The 5-inch gun forward elevated, slave of the fire control radar, and put a single proximity fuse round 200 meters off the bow of the lead boat. The shock wave alone, in a 16-ton hull at 50 knots, is not a warning. It is a physics lesson. The lead boat broke formation. The second hesitated. The geometry of the swarm, which depends on simultaneity, began to lose coherence inside the first 90 seconds. At the same moment, 20,000 feet above, the Growler went active. Not on the boats, on the Overwatch. The Haodong's targeting radars, the ones that would have cued their C-802s, went blind. Their burst columns back to shore turned to noise. The Overwatch layer, the part of the doctrine that was supposed to convert the close fight into a missile saturation engagement, was electronically severed from the swarm in under 30 seconds. The boats in the water did not know this yet. Their coordinator did, and his transmissions, suddenly clipped and repetitive, told the American listeners everything they needed. He was trying to reassert control over formation that had already lost its supporting fires. That changed the equation. Now the swarm was not 25 hulls executing a coordinated saturation attack. It was 25 hulls operating independently, inside the engagement envelope of a fully queued Aegis combatant with overhead support, an unseen submarine somewhere in the deep channel, and tactical aircraft inbound from the south. The cost asymmetry inverted in real time. Each remaining boat was no longer a cheap shot at an expensive target. Each boat was a tracked, prioritized, individually targetable contact in a fire control solution that updated 4 times per second. The phalanx never spun up. It did not need to. The 5-inch gun, firing control bursts of programmable rounds, walked proximity air bursts across the lead wave. 2 boats were disabled outright, dead in the water, crews abandoning into the warm Gulf. 3 more broke north, engines at full throttle, retreating toward Iranian territorial waters under the cover they assumed would protect them. The remainder hesitated, slowed, and began the longest 5 minutes of their crew's lives, sitting inside the gun envelope of a destroyer that had chosen, deliberately, not to escalate further. Because escalation was not the point. The point was demonstration. Specifically, demonstration to a very small audience inside the Iranian Naval Command structure. The audience that would receive the after-action report. The audience that would have to explain to leadership in Tehran why the central pillar of 3 decades of asymmetric naval doctrine had folded inside 6 minutes against a single American hull without that hull firing a single missile. The commander of the destroyer, a captain on his second command tour, gave the order to cease fire when the swarm broke. He did not pursue. He did not radio a victory. He logged the engagement, transmitted the data package south to the strike group, and continued his transit at 12 knots, as if nothing had happened. By 0450, the strait was quiet again. By sunrise, the disabled boats had been recovered by Iranian search and rescue. By midday, the official Iranian statement described a routine patrol and a successful warning operation against a provocative American vessel. That is what Tehran buried. Not casualties, not hulls. Those were recoverable. What Tehran buried was the operational conclusion that the swarm doctrine, the asymmetric centerpiece of the IRGC Navy, only works against an enemy who arrives alone, blind, and reactive. It does not work against an enemy who arrived 3 days early, listened to every transmission, mapped every pen, and chose the time and place of the engagement before the first Iranian boat ever left the dock. The cost asymmetry was real. The doctrine was coherent. The hulls were available. What was missing was the one variable Iranian planners cannot easily replicate: persistent layered network situational awareness across air, surface, subsurface, and electromagnetic spectrum. Fuse in real time and share across every platform inside the link. That is the hidden architecture. That is what changes the geometry of every future engagement in the strait. And that is why this incident, despite its brevity, despite its near total absence from the news cycle, mattered far more than the headline suggested. Because the next time it happens, the swarm will be larger. The boats will be faster. Some will carry loitering munitions instead of torpedoes. Some will be uncrewed entirely. Control from shore, expendable in ways no human crew can be. The Iranian Navy has been learning too. And the lessons of that night in Hormuz are being absorbed inside their planning cells just as carefully as inside ours. The question that remains, and a question that should sit uncomfortably with anyone watching the strait, is not whether the next engagement happens. It will. The question is whether the American architecture that worked that night, the P-8, the Triton, the Growler, the submarine, the over-the-horizon strike group, can be sustained at the same density 5 years from now, 10 years from now, against a saturation attack of 100 uncrewed hulls instead of 25 crewed ones. Because that is where the math changes again. That is where the cost asymmetry comes back, sharper than before. And that is the engagement Tehran is actually preparing for. The destroyer at 0347 was not outnumbered. She was a visible piece of a much larger structure, and that structure held. What matters is not what was visible that night. It is what arrives next, and whether the architecture that held the strait at 12 knots, in the dark, against 25 hulls, will still be there when the swarm returns at 100, if it's kind of layered. Strategic analysis is what you came here for. The deeper breakdowns of the engagements that shape the modern naval balance. Consider subscribing. There are more of these coming, and the next one sits even closer to the waterline.